Hi, everyone. Thank you all for attending today. My name is Nicole Jarvis. I'm the Assistant Director of Programs at Cancer and Careers, and I will be today's host for this 60-minute webinar. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items related to accreditation. Today's webinar is accredited for CEs by ANCC, NASW, the New York State Education Department State Board for Social Work, the California Board of Registered Nursing, and the Society for Human Resource Management. If you plan on receiving continuing education credit for this program or a general certificate, please proceed with the following steps. First, you must log in individually. Participants who listen in on someone else's line will not be eligible for credit. Second, you must complete and submit the evaluation and post-test and receive a passing grade on the post-test. Following today's session, you'll receive an email with all of this information. That email is going to be sent by 5 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow, Thursday, April 7th, and certificates will be emailed within 4 to 6 weeks. Also, please note that the planners and presenters for this program have not disclosed any pertinent financial relationships or conflicts of interest, and that no commercial support was provided for this program. Thanks in part to direct support from Genentech, HSN, and QVC, Cancer and Careers is able to offer this 8th year of Balancing Work and Cancer webinar series. This program was really created to provide patients and survivors, as well as their care teams and employers, with concise, targeted information around the work-related issues that arise after a cancer diagnosis. Additionally, we'd like to recognize Cancer and Careers year-round sponsors who support all of our core programs and allow us to continue providing all of our resources and services free of charge. Now, we often hear from cancer survivors going through a cancer diagnosis and treatment that the experience has brought up different ideas and really ignited new passions. Many state that they're ready for a change at work. For some, it's that they're more aware of the value of their time and what's meaningful to them, especially when it comes to work. And for others, they've realized the effect of cancer has changed what's realistic for them. The decision to change careers can be influenced by many emotions and factors. So as we start to talk about these changes and really about meaningful work, it's important to remember that the word meaning suggests that something is significant. And what's significant for one person may be different for another. Many people also assume that meaningful work means getting a job with a charity or a nonprofit, but there are actually many other ways to find meaning in a job. This and so much more will be discussed in today's webinar. So to take us through this topic, I'm thrilled to introduce Julie Jansen. For those who haven't joined us for the past 3 webinars that she's presented on, Julie is a speaker, trainer, coach, and author who has helped thousands of professionals find success and satisfaction at work, as well as finding work that's gratifying. Most important to us, Julie is one of the original coaches at Cancer and Careers, and over the years has helped patients and survivors with their individual employment challenges and provided expert advice on next steps. Following Julie's presentation, there's going to be plenty of time to ask questions. So for now, I'm going to turn it over to Julie to get things started.
Thanks so much, Nicole. So just to reiterate what Nicole just said, we hear over and over again at Cancer and Careers that after having cancer, people feel like they just no longer want to do the work that they've been doing because it doesn't align any longer with what's important to them from a values or lifestyle standpoint. Also, it can, and if we can just move to the next slide, it can be very difficult to either decide what you might want to do work-wise, even if you know you want to do something different, or if you do, how do you actually go about changing careers? And so we'll go through the process of doing that. Engaging in a single career or lifelong trade is no longer, and hasn't been for a while, the way we work or the way we'll ever work in the future. The US Department of Labor estimates that the average American will have at least 3, if not 5 or 6 careers in their lifetime, and 10 or 12 jobs, holding a job on average of 3.5 years. And this means that changing careers is not only acceptable, it is expected. More than one job with half holding both a full-time and a part-time position. And of course, the pandemic has forced many people to reinvent themselves, as well as caused even more people to decide that they want to be gratified as they can. They want to be as gratified as they can in their work. I will say that in my 20 years of doing this, I have never seen so many people focused on changing or shifting their functional areas or their industries. So let's talk about some things that also influence changing careers here on this slide. As adults, we just, Scott, if you could go back one, sorry. As adults, we tend to believe that we know all about the right and wrong ways to do things. We're so mired in our habits that it becomes hard to change. So in addition to giving you practical tips, what I'd also like to do is make you a little more aware of yourself and how others perceive you. So your attitude truly influences everything you do and say. If you're nervous, if you're angry, if you're apathetic, this shows. And these are all emotions that people don't find appealing, yet easily affect your presentation. The world is truly not fair, as we know, and unresolved feelings about your circumstances will jeopardize your search. Flexibility is a huge, crucial key to success. It's probably not a great idea to put up a lot of parameters, at least initially, when you're trying to figure out what to do next career-wise, that would preclude you. And you definitely want to think of ways to increase your energy and your enthusiasm, recognizing that your stamina may not be the same as it once was because of your treatment. However, if you can do something physical or mental that you really enjoy to increase your energy and enthusiasm, do this every day. And while nobody owes you anything, you really are in the driver's seat of creating your own destiny. It may not be tomorrow because the process of changing careers can take a while, but you will create your own destiny. And Monster's 2022 Future of Work report found that 93% of employers are hiring employees this year. The biggest challenge that both applicants and employers continue to have is with virtual interviewing and recruiting to gauge if culture and values align. Explore alternatives, even if you're focused on something different, until you know an option isn't for you. So for example, if you would prefer a contract or part-time job, be open to potentially a full-time job or vice versa. And of course, virtual and hybrid work arrangements are very common thanks to COVID. And then just industries that have been hiring or expanding in 2022 would be healthcare, IT, especially software and app developers, supply chain management, which is everything from purchasing, logistics, and distribution, financial management, and actuarial, and also data analytics and science. So regardless of the type of job that you're looking for, your ability to utilize technology is important. And so your attitudes about anything about you will certainly influence the attitudes of others. And it's a reality that age discrimination, chauvinism, prejudice, and all of those things exist. Companies are really, really focused on trying to change this, but it's still here, so don't dwell on it. If you make a career change, it will take much more time and energy than you expect. Timing is everything, and you'll get impatient. So be reasonable in your efforts in time management and learn to deal with the psychological impact of time passing with what seems to be, no glimmer of a new career. So there's some questions that you can ask yourself that are pretty important to answer, I think. And instead of just skipping forward and trying to figure out what you want to do next in whatever your new career may be, I would urge you to get advice from trusted colleagues or outside professionals before making the decision to follow your dreams. And the clients I've worked with, if they can answer these questions on this slide, it will help greatly in making a determination to seek alternative work. So I've been talking all day, so I'm going to gulp some water, forgive me. So number one, what are your financial needs? Very important to do a budget and be really, really, kind of honed in on what it is that you need financially. What's your required timeline, which can often be driven by the first question about finances for changing careers. Who depends on your income, your benefits? What are alternative sources of income besides your salary? And will your chosen new career path require additional training or education? And if that's true, can you do it? And also, what skills do you have that are transferable? The average person, by the time they're 35, have at least 50 skills that are transferable. So I just gave an exercise to someone I'm coaching who wants to change careers out of the food service business and operations. And I gave him a sort of a challenge of writing down as many skills as he can think of, and then ranking what his self-perceived expertise is with those skills. And I said, most people kind of get stuck at around, 8 to 10. So that's always a good exercise. And then on the next slide, some more questions that you can ask yourself. On the next slide, it would be, can you afford training or the time off that it might require to get that training or that education, or even to get an internship or an entry-level job in a new field? Do you have the stamina to complete any kind of education? And this is a big one. It's easy to do research on how many specific types of jobs are actually open in the United States in particular. So are companies actually hiring in your chosen new career? And if it's something where there's only, I'm making this up, but like 1,200 possible openings in the United States, that, you might rethink that. And then finally, are your dreams of a new career realistic given your circumstances and the environment in which you live? So answering these questions will definitely help you determine your next best steps in focusing on changing your career. So now I'll confess that this content comes from the book I wrote called I Don't Know What I Want, but I Know It's Not This. It's a 3-step process for changing careers. So on the next slide, it just outlines that 3-step process. Very simple sounding, maybe not as easy to implement, but the first step is self-assessment, and we'll get into it deeper. Then second is identifying opportunities and obstacles. And then the third is very, very clearly, simply create an action plan. So let's look at self-assessment first in greater depth on the next slide. So self-assessment I can't stress how important it is. I can't tell you how many people jump from, I don't want to do what I'm doing anymore, to, I think I want to do this, and they forget this part of the process. So self-exploration and self-assessment are, I think, mandatory before you move forward. And you can, again, as I mentioned earlier, you can hire a career coach or a professional, go back to your college or university and go to their career services to get help with this. There's tons of assessments online. So the first thing you want to do is really just start by taking an inventory of your personality preferences, your favorite skills, your interests, your accomplishments, looking back and highlighting the things that you enjoyed and are most proud of as part of the self-assessment process. And write these down and look for patterns in this inventory so that you can focus in on the areas that are of keenest interest or ability to you. And though this may seem tedious and almost a delay to the process, it's essential not only for determining your career change, but also for writing your resume, because you're going to need a new resume that will be different from, reflecting the work that you have been doing, and certainly for cover letters and absolutely for the interview process. And finally, the self-assessment process will build your confidence. By the time you finish compiling your self-evaluation, it's likely that you'll feel much more confident and knowledgeable about what you have to offer, and having the ability to articulate those things to a new employer or clients if you decide to start your own business is key. So moving on to the next slide, self-assessment involves a lot of things. I really like to start with values as a foundational piece, because what values are those things that motivate you, that fulfill you, that imbue your life with meaning. Nicole mentioned meaning, and we'll dig into that a little bit later, but meaning is different for everybody. So what are the top 5 or even 10 most important things that you deem as inherently valuable to you and your well-being? And your values, there's over 100 of them. Your values can range from building something to creativity to working on a team to learning, self-expression, physical activity, achievements, teamwork. So there's many values, and it's really key to know what they are and then be able to align possible jobs, work, and careers with those. And then there's what I call your attitudes. It's kind of a catch-all phrase to capture some of these things that are on the slide. Assessing your attitude towards yourself and towards the external world is another great way for being in touch with yourself. Research has consistently shown that your state of mind directly motivates your behavior. And in a positive sense, those people who possess an optimistic attitude about a goal or challenges are far better equipped to overcome any barriers to achieving that goal. And on the other hand, an individual who has a negative attitude will find it much more difficult to achieve his or her goal. So as you see here, having self-confidence, I mean, we all have moments and situations and times in our lives where we don't feel confident. And sometimes it's hard when you're looking at something that seems so ambiguous as changing careers to have confidence. So you've really got to do lots of things to bolster your self-confidence. Among them, the start of, assessing what you're good at and what your skills are and who you are, and then kind of having a team of people in your life that kind of can do the rah for you. Your self-knowledge is exactly what we're talking about right now. Managing relationships, it will be highly unlikely for you to be able to move forward in the career change process without relationships, whether it's a mentor, whether it's a professional coach or something, but it's your friends, your family, people in a new industry that you start to develop relationships with. People are just key to helping you with this process. Maintaining motivation is not easy. I mean, it's never like just straight, even keel. Your motivation goes up and it goes down, and that's very normal. So, but just try to think of ways, just as I was talking about being energetic and enthusiastic, try to think of ways to stay motivated in the process, because you're going to sometimes have more downs than ups and more what seem to be disappointments than successes in this process. And then having goal orientation, and that's kind of a piece of, your goal is not, I want to identify a new career, because that's way too lofty and overwhelming. It would be more setting little goals, like I'm going to complete my self-assessment process in the next 30 days. And I'm going to be able to verbalize or articulate who I am in a nutshell on a 1-page Word document and feel comfortable talking about it. So that would be a goal. And you want to constantly be setting goals, and the size of the goal has everything to do with being realistic and what your timing is and all of that. And then finally, professional commitment. So professional commitment is not just reading online newsletters or blog posts about your supposed new career. It's really getting out there and trying to dabble in it, get a project in whatever it is, go to a boot camp, try to interview people informationally in your potential new career, really any kind of credentials you might need, just really digging in to learning and embracing whatever that new career is. So then the next part of self-assessment is your personality. So on the next slide, it talks to you about the different types of personality characteristics you can have. And you might all be familiar with Myers-Briggs type indicator, MBTI. That's definitely the most validated personality assessment. And there are many, 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 many assessments. I was talking to someone today who manages a group of people, and she had everybody on her team go through DISC. You know, there's just a lot of them. And it really, I don't know that it, I mean, I happen to like MBTI. So what I did in my book is I just kind of did a variation of it. So people are either extroverted, outgoing, or introverted. That's just kind of where you get your energy. So I'm clearly an extrovert, so I get more energy from people. I get tired and want to be by myself too. And introverts like people, but they need to kind of regroup on their own more. Whether you're an idealist or a realist, whether you're emotional, feeling, or factual, whether you prefer structure or spontaneity, and whether you're more assertive or acquiescent. Those are just some, you know, characteristics that are examples, but you do need to do work that is aligned with your personality. I mean, all I do all day is talk to people. And I think, while I have plenty of colleagues who are coaches and are introverts, I don't get as drained as maybe some of my introvert colleagues do as a coach. And, you know, so they're like, if you told me I had to create Excel spreadsheets all day, I would just panic, because that's not a good activity for my type of, my personality, because I'm feeling and extroverted. So just be really sensitive to how something will align with your personality. On the next slide, we kick into interests and skills. So interests, it's not necessary to really feel passionate about what you're doing, but it is really important to be very interested. And if, you know, people kind of fall into preferring one of these four things: people, ideas, data, and objects. So for me, data would be the last on my list, but for a lot of people I know, data is the first. Data's huge right now in every industry. So there's lots of jobs available. So kind of just knowing like what you're drawn to. And, you know, some people just really like the idea of thinking for a living, and some people like to work with their hands. And so that would be the objects. And then favorite skills, I call it this because, well, I mentioned that by the time you're 35, you have up to 50 skills. You don't necessarily want to use some of your skills. Like, I like to write. I'm an author. I like to write, but I would not want to write all day. I mean, I write resumes, but that's not kind of writing. But I mean, I don't see, even though it's a strong skill. So you kind of have to take a look at all the skills you have. And once you've evaluated what all those are, then kind of go back and say, well, which ones of these do I still thoroughly enjoy using? And which ones do I wish that, you know, I never had to do again? And which ones am I okay about using in moderation? So that sums up all of the areas of self-assessment. So now what I want to do is move to the next step, which is talking about your work situation. So if you're looking at the deck, you'll see that there's 6 here that have been identified by me, and they are, you know, kind of like a grouping. I mean, it sort of seems negative, like I don't have something, but I developed these based on a way that people could relate to them and understand them immediately without any further explanation. So I'll explain them really briefly, and then we'll run into, you know, getting a little deeper in each one. Where's the meaning is the number one, according to my survey and according to my experience and all of my clients. Most individuals rank this category as their number one reason for dissatisfaction. And both Nicole and I mentioned it when we kicked off this webinar. And again, oh, that's good, Jamie, I'm glad. So again, here's the different types. Oh, well, let me just, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So then there's been there, done that, but still need to earn. That's people that you know, they need a certain amount of money, but maybe their situation personally is going to change. So they might not need as much later on. So that's a planning thing. Bruised and Gun Shy, I'm sad to say, is so many people who have been fired or laid off, or you know, just their industry tanked, or there were mergers and acquisitions, and they've got to recover. Bored and plateaued, it's very normal to become bored. So these people are, you know, people that have been doing the same kind of work for a really long time and need something new, yearning to be on your own. Just self-employment is just the right fit for you. I talked to someone the other day and I said to him, you should be an entrepreneur. And he said, I know, that's what I want to do. I don't like working for people. So we're kind of planning how we can figure out how to, you know, start a company. And then finally, smaller portion of people, but one toe in the retirement pool. Sometimes that's just about age, or someone falls into the bored and plateaued situation and they're not that, you know, gung-ho about trying to figure something else out. And it could be just semi-retirement. And honestly, retirement is kind of an antiquated word, but it's still the word that's used for that phase. Okay, so now let's jump deeper into where's the meaning on the next slide. So I mentioned that this is the most common reason that people want to change careers in particular, not so much change jobs. And people are afraid that if they do this, if they look for meaning, like as Nicole mentioned, you're going to have to work for a nonprofit or a charity, but that's not the case. So here I identified 10 types of meaning. So the first, rewards and challenges, is basically new opportunities, more money, or recognition. An interesting, intriguing, attractive, emerging field or industry. You know, I've gotten a lot of people reaching out that want me to write their resume so they can get into crypto and Bitcoin and some of those fields. Expressing your ideals and values are really just kind of being loyal to your specific standards, your principles, and your values, the values that we had talked about a little bit earlier. Contributing and making a difference. You'd think everybody would want to do that, but some jobs and careers are much more about that. I mean, I do find that those of you who have had cancer, kind of, this is a big one for you, that you want to give back. You may want to work with other people who have cancer. You want to be a patient advocate. So it's really just sharing, changing, or improving something that makes a difference for people. Solving problems or answering complex questions. I talked to someone today who was in charge of IT support for she works at a bank, and that's all she does and her team does all day is just solve IT problems. Changing your lifestyle, a lot of people have done that in the last couple of years. Feeling passionate about something. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. I don't really think it's important to feel passionate, just interested, but some people do need to feel passionate about their particular field. I worked with someone a number of years ago who's progressing nicely in her career, and she just was, the only thing she was interested in was supplying water to countries that had no water supply. That was her focus. And that was what her degrees were in, and that's all she cares about. And then supporting a cause, contributing your time, your resources, your expertise, advocating for a change, promoting a mission, innovating or creating, introducing, producing, imagining something new and different. And then finally, learning, which is just gaining knowledge, understanding, expertise, either through experience or study. So what I would do is just look at this list and kind of just decide which ones are most interesting or most important to me, and narrow it down, because you're not going to find all 10 types of meaning in a job. And you know, as the book, it's an old book. Marcia Sinitar wrote a book called Do What You Love and the Money Will Follow. And I absolutely wholeheartedly believe that, if that's what's important to you. So moving to the next one, been there, done that, but still need to earn. That one is pretty obvious. These people continue to be successful, but they might have fixed expenses like college loans or alimony payments, and they just don't play, they're busy working, earning money, living their life, and they're not looking at these questions on this slide, which is reviewing their self-assessment results, understanding clearly what their financial situation is and when it'll change, budgeting, it's a lot about money in this one, reconfiguring the way they're working and any other elements of a future career, because you don't want to get to a point where you really need to figure it out and you feel like you only have 2 months to do it. So this is all sort of, do this work ahead of time, and then you've got half the battle of doing this, and then it's easier for you to go to the external world and start talking to people. And then the next one, we mentioned Bruised and Gun Shy. So this category is, it's geared towards people who have, I don't like to use the word victimized, but victimized as employees. They've been laid off, suffered a horrible manager, caught up in corporate politics, and whatever it is that's happened to you, it does chip away at your self-confidence, your self-esteem. And so this is really about just building yourself up and letting people help you build yourself up, doing things that you've been successful at, setting achievable goals and having a loving support group and always learning new things, maybe taking little risks, and always have a contingency plan, because bad things happen. They just happen to all of us. And oftentimes they catch us kind of flat-footed and by surprise. And so then you don't want to have to be spending a lot of time kind of working on yourself every time something happens. So that's Bruised and Gun Shy. Bored and Plateaued is, on the next slide, this is people who they're just ready to make a change. I know when I worked for people, every 3 years, not sooner, I was bored. And I actually thought something was wrong with myself. Why am I bored all the time? And I'll tell you, in all the time I've been in my own business, I think I was bored last year during the pandemic, because it was a tough year. But that's the only time I can recall, and that was pretty much out of my control, that I've been bored. And being bored is a terrible feeling. And being plateaued is another one where I talk to people more frequently than I'd like, who's kind of, they've hit not so much a glass ceiling or anything like that. That certainly happens, but they just hit their head and they can't move anywhere else. They can't progress, so it's kind of a combination of those two. So I always kind of joke and say, if you're in the bored and plateaued category, it's kind of like if you're in a relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship or a friendship or family thing, and it's not working for you. You don't want to run out and find another one. You kind of want to figure out what you can do with your current situation so that you're not as bored, and assess what actually still does give you enjoyment and fulfillment in your work, and then decide how to keep those aspects of your work, and maybe using your self-assessment results, kind of figure out how you can identify and plan work that you can do that will stimulate you and challenge you. And then if it doesn't work, if there's just not enough there, then it's time to say, okay, I've worked for 4 companies in the same industry. I definitely don't want to be in this industry anymore. It's time for me to change careers. So looking outside of where you've been. Yearning to be on your own. These people dream of being self-employed. I'd like to say that I dreamt of being self-employed. I didn't ever, that I recall, but I just knew that the work that I wanted to do, I couldn't be an employee. So I almost had no choice, and I don't regret a minute of it. And I didn't realize what a good fit it would be. And there's lots of variations as being self-employed. You don't have to be, an entrepreneur and be Jeff Bezos, but you certainly can work just as a contract employee. You can freelance. You can, franchises are still quite popular. The service businesses are the most popular franchises, like cleaning, beauty, signage, pet grooming, tutoring, and those have less of a startup. But the nice thing about franchises is that you're provided with a structure and guidance. People buy businesses, people develop partnerships. And the barriers that are pretty prevalent with being on your own, no matter what the model is your need to get business constantly, your need to maintain cash flow, lack of we were just talking about taxes before, happy topic. And when you're in your own business, you don't really get tax refunds. So that, the cash flow thing is always interesting. Lack of a support system. You may have family members who just don't get why you're doing your own thing, and when it seems like it could be such a struggle. And blending your business and your life is always challenging. But if you're meant to be in one of these categories and yearning to be on your own, it's glorious. It really is. I'll say that firsthand. So, and then finally, one toe in the retirement pool. So those are people who, like I said, they hit a certain age, or they just hit a point where I've had a lot of people reach out to me lately. Oh, I've done something for 31 years. I'm ready for something else, and I just don't know what it is. And can you help me? So they call themselves retired, but they still want to do something. And really only 15% of people who are retirement age actually don't want to work at all. So this is, and the major barrier here is that not paying attention to your values and your interests, and not believing that you can do anything you want to. And even at this stage of your work life, planning your work retirement phase is important. So looking at researching, of course, once again, your finances, choosing where you'll live, what kind of work do you want to do? How much of it do you want to do? Where do you want to do it? All that stuff are things that you need to really think about if you happen to fall into this category. Okay, so now we're going to the second part of the 3-step phase on the next slide, which is identifying opportunities and roadblocks. So I am a career coach, so obviously I think that opportunities are limitless. I really do. I think there's just so much out there, that's exciting. There's so many problems to be solved. There's so many burgeoning careers. My cat is meowing at me. I don't know why. That's strange. Talking to people, just go out there and talk to people about what's going on in the world. Do research, identify trends. I still look at the World Future Society newsletter online because it's fascinating to me. They predict like trends that can happen in different industries. And I always look at, like, there's a manufacturing newsletter that I look at, and it talks about so many interesting things from a technology standpoint, of course, AI. There's just so much out there. And like I said, thinking about, there's still tons and tons and tons of problems that need solving. And, how many times, not that you need to be an inventor, but how many times have you looked at something that was as newly invented and said, oh my gosh, I should have thought of that, So it's kind of fun to think about the opportunities. The hard part is sort of narrowing it down and then turning it into some sort of work for you. And then, of course, on the next slide, there's always the roadblocks or perceived roadblocks. So one of the perceived roadblocks, and it is a roadblock if you want to go work for a large corporation and you're 60 years old, that's going to be a little bit hard depending on what your specialty is. But age doesn't necessarily pose a roadblock unless you let it. Money, being fearful of not earning enough money, which kind of talked about that when we talked about working, potentially finding meaning and working for a nonprofit. Time, feeling like you don't have enough time to kind of go through the process of figuring out something new, not having any industry experience. I mean, I'm happy to say that I've observed that more and more companies are being open to hiring people that don't have industry experience, depending on what their expertise is. Like I talked to a chief legal officer today, and she works in financial services, and she worked in energy before. And I said, oh, that's interesting that they hired you. And she said, they specifically said they want someone with fresh eyes to come in and kind of stir the pot and make things different. And they didn't want yet another person from the same industry. So not everybody thinks that way, not every company, not every industry, but many are moving more and more towards that. And then the final one is just feeling like, you're at a point where you don't want to get a master's degree, or you don't want to take the CFA exam, which is really hard, or, whatever it is. But a little bit of I get this question by early career people a lot, is like, should I get a certification? Should I have additional education? And I'm like, in the beginning of your career, it's all about learning and developing skills. It really is. So whatever education you can have, and even at my point in my career, I'm getting a coaching certification right now. It's a specific one. It's not a really like 2-year thing, but it's very specific to a model that I really appreciate. And it's very invigorating to have to study and take tests, because I really honestly haven't done it in a long time. So finally, creating an action plan. It sounds boring. It's the last step in the process on the next slide. And so, but I do think that writing things down, it doesn't need to be pages and pages, but writing things down, whether you do it by hand or you open up a Word document, that's what brings a dream to life. That's what brings goals to life. And while it seems a little tedious, using some model, this one is the SMART model formula: specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, on a timeline. And remember what I said about goals earlier, is you're setting small goals, not huge goals. And you're keeping your entire action plan flexible, because it's highly likely that it will change. And you're revisiting it quite often, and definitely running it by advisors. When I was starting my business, and five years in, I was constantly reaching out to my sort of informal board of advisors to ask them questions about the reality of what I was doing. But it's not something that you have this plan and it's set in concrete and it's never going to change. So those are the processes or the steps rather of the process: self-assessment, identifying opportunities and obstacles, and creating an action plan, determining like why do you want to do something different, and then using that information to kind of focus on what your new thing will be, and then being patient with the timing, being realistic and setting small goals. And I guarantee if you do all of those things, it really will work, and you will be successful at changing careers. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Nicole.
Great, thank you so much, Julie. Can you guys hear me okay? Yes. Okay. Can you hear me, Julie?
Yes.
Okay. So I can tell by the comments that are coming in that this definitely resonated with a lot of people. So I'm sure people are anxious to get to the Q&A. So before we do that, I just wanted to point out A couple of other resources that we have. Someone had actually asked in the Q&A box about one-on-one coaching. We don't have anything specific around coaching, but we do have an Ask a Career Coach message board in which a number of our volunteer career coaches are available to answer questions. So that's worth taking a look at if you have something specific that you're struggling with. We also have a free resume review service, which Julie takes care of for us, which is fantastic. We have some publications, including our job search toolkit that's really helpful. And then just a bunch of articles and resources that are focused on looking for work. I want to go to the next slide. And then I do just want to point out a number of our upcoming CAC events. We have a bunch more webinars throughout the year. We hold them monthly. So next month we'll be doing newly diagnosed. And we have one on setting boundaries that's really helpful. I always learn something new when we do that one as well. And I do want to point out that we do have our national conference on work and cancer taking place on Friday. I believe that should be June 24th. It will be a virtual conference again this year. So definitely feel free to register for that. We'd love to have you. It's going to be a great day. Okay, so if you want to move to the next slide, I'm just going to leave up the CEU requirements for those of you who need them, but we will move on to the Q&A section now. So if any of you have any questions, please go ahead and put them into the Q&A box, and we'll just give you a minute to enter those in now. Okay, I do see one from Julia. Julia asked, this refers to when you're being interviewed. My biggest concern is that I've been out of work now for 4 years, partially because of my diagnosis and partially because of COVID. How would you go about explaining that 4-year gap in employment?
So I'm not being flippant when I say this, but gaps don't really mean that much anymore because of, primarily because of COVID. So it's rare that I have a client say to me, oh, I was asked about my 2-year, 3-year, 4-year, 5-year gap. The only, the answer that I like to give to that question, which we get pretty frequently, is just be prepared with an answer, a short answer that you feel comfortable with. And Nicole, I don't know if you want to jump in and add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think you're totally right. The resume gap, especially after the pandemic, has just the focus on it, the sign of a red flag is so much lessened because of the fact that tons of people have been out of work, and a lot of the time out of no choice of their own. So, with that said, it could come up. So it's always good to just have some pretty vague short answer available, and likely you can just move on to something else. We offer some tips on how to do that using what we call the swivel, which really just swivels the interviewer's attention to your skill set and experience, as opposed to focusing on any kind of negative type thing on your resume or in your experience. So definitely check out our website if you want to learn a little bit more about that. But overall, the resume gap is our most common question, but it tends to be the least problematic in the job search these days. But again, just having something on hand and prepared is really helpful.
Yeah, and just remember that the things that are really, that you're stressed or worried about, you're much more stressed and worried about it than the person you're talking to. It's so true of so many things, and so it's kind of a, taking care of yourself psychologically and just saying, I've got my response. And like Nicole said, I'm going to swivel it back to when I'm so excited about sitting here talking to you, because I know I can help, so.
Yeah, absolutely. So I see another question from Jamie. My question is about changes brought on by chemotherapy and menopause as they relate to executive functioning, memory, organization, stamina, etc. I'm no longer capable of doing my old job, and quite frankly, not sure of what type of work I can do. Do you have any advice or suggestions?
So my advice is to follow the process that I outlined in this webinar, which is, kind of go through a self-assessment process of all the things that I talked about, your values, your skills, your interests, and then, sort of start doing some homework on like what you find appealing that aligns with that, and then have some informational meetings and hone it down, because the truth is, if there's 75,000 jobs, there's probably only about 3 or 4 that you would want to do anyway. So
not to overwhelm anybody.
yeah, not to overwhelm anyone, right? Sorry about that.
All right, there's a bunch of questions coming in, so just give me a second to read them. Okay, this one comes from Jennifer. I have been working on self-assessment and identifying new interests, but am stuck focusing on not having experience. Any suggestions on how to highlight translatable or transferable skills? Also, I only recently realized that cancer is a diagnosis that triggers the "do you have a disability" voluntary question. I don't know how to answer that 1 year post-treatment, but needing time for medical appointments, I just answered decline. Do you have any advice?
So I'll answer the first part if you answer the second part. So the first one is, I am a firm believer in being obvious about the fact that you're changing careers on your resume. And it used to be that you should hide it and then hope that, you would still get interviews. But it's really like looking at the skills that whatever the new thing is that you're interested in is looking for, and then putting those on your resume in your bulleted keyword section or in your summary, and then being able to speak to those and saying the reason that this skill is, it would be like me, I'm a career coach, but I've never worked in a college, so would they hire me? I don't know, but yeah, I have career coaching experience with people of all ages. So even though I've never worked in a college, I did go to college, and I had, so it's sort of like figuring out the connections that you have to the industry and to the job, and then being obvious about that on your resume, and the way you speak about your experience, and they're either going to like you and say, oh, wow, we want to talk to you more, or they're going to be, maybe not as flexible about bringing someone in from a different industry. And there's nothing you can do about that. So,
and sometimes being creative highlights other skills, just being able to, show different experiences that, at first glance might seem kind of out there, but once you connect the dots for them, they could say, oh, I never thought about that, and really like the way that you're thinking about things and your approach to things. I think one should never undervalue, a creative approach and, doing things a little bit differently. Companies are always looking to innovate and improve processes. And, if everybody that's worked in that job has been on the same track and the same mindset, it's unlikely that they're going to come up with anything new like that. So sometimes that kind of outside perspective can be really, really appreciated.
And then Jennifer had the other part of her question about the.
Yep. So in terms of the question on the application, we tend to say, with voluntary questions, they are voluntary. So it's totally up to you what you want to do. With that said, if the disability question is part of a number of other questions that are also voluntary, I would recommend saying decline to answer for all of them, just so that it's not as highlighted or red flagged that you only decided to decline to answer the one about the disability. At the end of the day, you never know how a company is reading those. You hope that they're doing them fairly, but you just never know. So if you are concerned about that being an issue, I would just recommend writing decline to answer for all of them. Okay, there's more coming in. Okay, what if I really don't know what to transition to, but I sense I do need a change? The chemo brain does affect the clarity of my mental abilities. It seems so elusive and a dream like pie in the sky.
Well, that's why I encourage you to go through the process, the 3-step process.
Mm-hmm.
Just start with self-assessment, as I said, and then just kind of move on and go through that. And if it takes a little longer, you sense that you need a change, then you probably do need a change, but just be patient with yourself. And the best resource is other people who have changed careers, or people who are working in industries or jobs that could seem appealing to you.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of resources that Cancer and Careers provides about dealing with handling and managing chemo brain. So definitely check out the website for
Yeah,
that.
I mean, I think chemo brain is really challenging because you know, it takes over your mental faculties in a way that you may not realize until you're in the moment. So it can be kind of hard to plan around them. But really, our biggest recommendation in terms of chemo brain is really just going back to the basics of staying organized. You know, since it does impact your memory so much, you know, just lots of to-do lists, lots of writing things down, lots of scheduling time for yourself to get organized, things like that can be really helpful.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you're looking for new jobs, thinking about, you know, what you wouldn't necessarily maybe need to think on your feet too much or be in the moment and make decisions right in the moment. You know, if you have a little bit more of an opportunity to have notes in front of you or things like that, that can be helpful too. We have another question. Any tips for people with previous healthcare jobs, so a very defined skill set, that are thinking about doing something else that's not healthcare related?
Well, that would be a really definitive career change. So it's just, I'm unable to answer that question specific to you because I don't know what your skills are. I don't know what you're interested in or your personality and all of those things. But I think that's, if you're just absolutely adamant about not being in healthcare in any way, shape, or form, whether even if it's even non-clinical, then it's really just kind of figuring out like, what else do I want to do? You know,
Mhm.
like what else, what interests me, what jobs, what, you know, if I could have started over, what would I have done differently? What are other people doing that seems appealing to me? You know, kind of asking yourself lots of questions.
Mhm. Absolutely. All right, we have a couple of minutes left, so just enough time for a couple more questions, if that's all right with you, Julie.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Um, okay, I've been thinking about a career change since before my cancer diagnosis and just never pulled the trigger. I'm a year into treatment and finally feeling good enough to start my job search. I was in a customer-facing sales role before, but found it too stressful. So I'm interested in moving in the direction of marketing instead. How do you think I should go about positioning myself to make that change? And what skills do you think I should be highlighting?
So what's great about, and congratulations, I'm feeling better too. That's great. What's great about being interested in marketing, and marketing is a huge category. So it could be digital, it could be creating, you know, materials, it could be, there's so many aspects, but because you've been in customer facing sales, you've worked closely with marketing. So you can draw in a lot of that experience, and maybe talk to some of your former colleagues who worked in marketing and just ask them how you can position yourself on your resume and in informational conversations.
Mhm.
I mean, you're not saying, you know, I want to be in human resources now, or I want to become be in IT. So I think there's definitely a close relationship and many transferable skills between the two.
Absolutely. Yeah, and again, it's another area where being a little creative about how you could apply your past experience can be really helpful. All right, let's do one more question. I've been out of treatment for some time, but I'm feeling some lingering side effects. I really want to work, but I'm looking to take on something with less responsibility and stress. I'm really worried that employers are going to look at my resume and immediately disregard me because I'm overqualified. So how can I best explain this change without talking about my cancer?
So I think, I mean, I don't know what you did or what you think you want to do, other than the fact that you don't want as stressful of a job. I think that you've got to get whatever you decide you want to do. You just have to put in your cover letter and on your resume that you want to do something different, and that you've identified whatever it is that you've identified once you figure that out, and that's what you're focused on. And then be able to answer questions in screening interviews, like and as far as being overqualified, I mean, there is a level of needing to kind of, and I hate to use this expression, but um, uh, dumbing down your resume a little bit, but you don't want to do it too much. And
Mhm.
you want to kind of weave into the headline, the summary, and the keywords, the information and the language that's relevant to the new position that you're looking at, you know.
Mhm.
So if, like, for example, you were a director, I'm making this up, a director of research, a VP, and then now you want to be a research analyst, you know, you'll have to speak to that in your resume, because everything gets scanned depending on the organization. So, and
Yeah.
a lot of these questions are just not easy to answer in
Without
30
more
seconds,
context.
unfortunately. So if you're feeling frustrated, I apologize for that, but you can definitely write into the career, ask a career coach. You know, and I'm one of the coaches. I actually answered 2 of them today. So be happy to, you know, elaborate in much more detail for any of these questions.
Absolutely. On that note, it is 7 o'clock on the dot, and so I know everybody is probably anxious to get going. So we're going to end it here in the interest of time. We really do hope that you guys all found this webinar valuable. We really appreciate the feedback. So when we do email that online evaluation tomorrow, we'd really appreciate you to take the time to fill this out. It's really what helps us to develop this program better, and also continue to receive the funding to have these calls and continue them being free. If we were unable to get to your question during today's call, please feel free to email us your question at cancerandcareers@cew.org, or as Julie mentioned, hitting up the Ask a Career Coach board, which we're always keeping an eye on. So thank you again to Julie for your valuable insights. Thank you all for attending an evening webinar. We really appreciate it, and have a wonderful rest of your evening. Bye, Julie.
Bye. Thanks, Nicole.